I know I don't look like myself, okay? But something really strange happened, and I'm really scared. I need you to help me, my best friend. I can prove it to you. Oh, the space goes down, down, baby, down, down the roller coaster. Sweet, sweet baby, sweet, sweet, don't let me go. Shimmy, shimmy, cocoa pop, shimmy, shimmy, rock. Shimmy, shimmy, cocoa pop, shimmy, shimmy, rock. I met a girlfriend, a Trisket. She said a Trisket, a biscuit, ice cream, soda, pop, vanilla on the top. Ooh, Shalita, walking down the street, 10 times a week. I met it, I said it, I stole my mama's credit. I'm cool, I'm hot, suck you in the stomach 3 more times.
Okay, let's all go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 299. And our movie this week from 1988, starring Tom Hanks, it's Big, and here to join me and talk about it, because she had not seen it before, from the Horse Girls podcast, Alex and Birds. Alex, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. A little cold. It's cold up here in Michigan, but it's that time of year. Okay, Big, starring Tom Hanks, 1988, directed by Penny Marshall. You had not seen this before, so
I did not.
what familiarity, if any, did you have with this movie?
Okay, so once it started, I realized a lot more than I thought I did because like how many times have we seen in other shows like you go to the fair and like find a booth with some sort of fortune teller in it that then grants you a wish that's like a sort of monkey paws wish like
Mhm.
that the clip that you played at the beginning, the sort of song thing that they had, he and his
Yeah.
best friend, I'd heard that before.
Mhm.
And then not to give it away, but I live within a proximity to Chicago that has let me to go to the FAO Schwartz store before it closed down. So the piano thing was known to me.
Okay.
So I'd never seen it, but like because of the cultural oeuvre, I knew a lot more of it than I thought I did.
Yeah, it is one of those movies that really was kind of a cultural touchstone in the late 1980s. So, 1988 stars Tom Hanks, as I mentioned, directed by Penny Marshall, co-written by Steven Spielberg's sister.
Really?
Yeah, and I did read where he was at one point up for potentially directing it and decided not to, in part because he didn't want to take any of the wind out of her sails. And he kind of wanted
Oh,
her
that's
name to be on
cool.
it. How true that is, I mean, it's IMDb trivia, so you got to take that with a grain of salt, but I like the idea of that.
I mean, I was convinced when you started that sentence it was going to end with because he was too busy with Jurassic Park, which I know he did that in like 6 months, but still.
Yeah, that was a few years later. But yeah, so 1988, Tom Hanks actually was up for this was his first nomination for Best Actor was for this film. And I'll tell you, so I did see this when I was a kid. I did not see it in theaters, but I do remember seeing it very quickly after it on home video. And I'd seen it a few times and then haven't watched it in probably 20 or 25 years. Like it's been a long time, but it just had that kind of indelible mark on my life. Watching it again this time, I 100% get why he was nominated for an Oscar for this. His
Yeah.
performance in this is real good. I kind of blown away by how well he acts like a kid in this movie.
Yeah, I was there was so much of it where I had to remind myself like that he really is acting like he's pretending to be a kid. I don't know. He sold it so well, and I think especially in like the trampoline scene, that's where I
Mhm.
really was like, "Ooh, this is good." Like he's selling it hard.
So he was offered the role and had to turn it down initially because he was working on something else at the time. I don't remember what now offhand. I'm sure I could look it up. But a couple of other people that were in line for it. In fact, they started. So Hanks couldn't do it, and then Robert De Niro wanted to do this movie. and they started to rework the script a little bit to kind of fit his style a little bit more. And from what I read, the studio then said, but he wants like $6 million to make it. We're not going to give him that much. So they get rid of, they go in a different direction. And by that point, Hanks kind of was like, well, maybe I could do it. And so they get him in to do it. I'm trying to imagine the version of this with Robert De Niro as Josh, because that's a very different movie at that point. I really feel like, because what I love is it's the story we've seen many times. It's that it's not quite, I mean, it is body swap comedy, but it's not between two people. It's not like a Freaky Friday type situation.
That's exactly what I was thinking too. I was like, yeah, not Lindsay Lohan's situation.
No, but what is it? Jennifer Garner's movie, 13 Going on 30.
Yes.
Effectively the same story. There's been a few other ones where you get that, you put it perfectly, the monkey's paw wish of like, I want to be something else. And you get that. And then, oh, maybe I don't want this. Maybe this, but it seems great at first. Another good example of it is Bruce Almighty, actually, is kind of the same type of story. You know, he wants something, he gets the powers of God, and he does exactly what any slightly immature dude would do with the powers of God to start before he sort of realizes. And that's what I love about this is Josh gets turned big and he does everything a kid would do at that point. To once he started getting some money in, which is great because he just lucks into so much crap in this
He
movie.
sure does. That's,
Um,
the one part that felt so different for me though than like the 13 going on 30, that kind of stuff, is that he immediately lands the dream job, right? Like
mhm,
what better job, even now, what better job is there than playing with toys to make sure they're good enough for kids, right?
right? Exactly.
Like when he was like, I want to turn back, I was like, you haven't even paid your taxes. Like what reason do you have for wanting to go small again?
And it's what I like too is this movie doesn't waste time. It's an hour and 40 minutes long, and the pacing is
Hmm.
great because we open up with him as a kid, and we get just enough seeing him as a kid to understand why he wants to be an adult, right? And we do that within 10 minutes. It's less
It's
than 10
no time
minutes.
at all. Yeah.
It's super efficient storytelling because you could easily. I just watched in theaters. This will time stamp this episode, but I just went to the theater and watched Craven the Hunter, the new Spider-Man anti-hero villain universe thing. That movie spent like 20 minutes, almost its entire first act, with him as a teenager giving you backstory, setting him up. And it was just way too long. This is that super efficient, like, hey, here's this kid. He wants to play video games and play with toys, but his parents are yelling at him to, take the trash out. He doesn't want those responsibilities. He wants to he's super nervous around the girl that he likes, but then he tries to, impress her by going on the ride at the carnival, only to get turned away by the carny, which is great because that's one of those things. It's perfect because as an adult, you understand. No, that's there so for safety. That's a safety thing. But as a kid, you don't get that. Like you're just like, no, it's
Right.
just telling me I'm not good enough to do the thing. Um,
He's just making fun of me for being a loser like everyone else.
right, exactly. And then within a few minutes, he finds that Zoltar machine. Which here's a cool thing: you can actually buy and or build like various versions of the Zoltar machine. They made them available to buy, but they also had like even simple mock-up ones that you could like put somebody inside um to pretend to
So
be Zoltar.
how much would that cost? Like that
That I
it seems
don't
like it would be
know.
expensive.
I mean, it depends on kind of how far you go into it, right? Like how elaborate you
Yeah,
get.
it's
Because I
true.
think the cheap ones were basically like cardboard. It's kind of a cardboard box, but you sit a person in it and they
Makes sense.
pretend to be Zoltar.
Yeah,
Um,
Halloween
ver-
type costume.
yeah, exactly. Um, but it's all born out of this. Like fortune teller machines had been around, but I think Zoltar itself was sort of made for this movie. Yeah, I mean they're little as like $100 up to I see some for 9,000 for like full
Wow, so it was a
standing.
broad range.
Yeah. Um, I love the Zoltar machine though. That thing is cool looking because
It's cool. It's creepy.
it's very creepy. Um, like the glowing red eyes, and I love the movie giving us, it's sitting off by itself, and he walks over to it, and then when it starts up, and you're thinking, okay, and then you just see it unplugged before he picks up the plug to realize it is unplugged. And this movie is one of those. It does the great fantasy thing of like, we're not going to give any explanation whatsoever to anything that's going on here. It just happens.
I loved that, but you know what I loved is secondarily, they also established a rule set to it because later when he goes back to being small, he has to re-unplug it. Like when it
Hmm.
was plugged in, that was preventing it from working. And that detail, like I loved that so much because I was like, I don't understand what the weird fantasy ritual is, but it adds this kind of like there has to be a ritual involved as well, which
Yes.
was unexpected and very cool.
Yeah. And it is a fantasy movie, and you definitely get that through like if you start applying real world logic to things that are going on in this movie, it will fall apart very quickly. Like for instance, child goes missing for six
Right.
plus weeks, and some guy with the same name starts working a kind of high profile job in a way. I mean, even if nobody
Yeah,
outside that
fair.
company knows him, somebody in there at a company that size would have seen the name of this child missing in New Jersey, and it's the same name as this guy. Like,
And they had the milk carton scene too, like, it was
yes.
right there, like, it would have taken anybody turning the milk carton to know.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So they're like that, of course, or even when he calls home was great.
Oh my god, yeah, 'cause you know immediately, like, his parents were played for such fools constantly, right? Like,
Hmm.
I get why his mom was freaked out when he walked in as an adult. I can totally understand why she wouldn't recognize him, right? Because it is like a fantasy thing that she's not buying into. But like when he calls home, and especially the like, no, I swear he's sitting next to me. It's like, why are no red flags happening like with
Right.
anyone?
And we know the police have been involved because they were at the
Yeah.
house, but now nothing. Just no follow up on that at all.
They
They
stopped
never.
that search 5 minutes in. They're like, you know
Right.
what? Sometimes kids go missing.
Yeah, they just go missing for weeks at a time, and we're not even going to question the best friend who lives next door. Nope, don't worry about that.
Nope,
Um,
and you know what? HR is not going through any paperwork, we're not checking his Social Security, we're not asking for an ID.
I mean, they checked the social security and that it didn't have enough numbers.
Right, and then he
Uh,
just threw out 12 and it was like, "Alright, good enough."
no, but at the same time, like I don't mind it because it is a fantasy movie and it moves so briskly to get to like these great moments and things that happen in Josh's life as he's an adult that are first of all, as a young boy, David Moscow played young Josh, and he was going to play Billy before when De Niro was attached. But then when De Niro left and Tom Hanks came back in, they switched him to young Josh because he had enough resemblance to Tom Hanks for that. So then they get Jared Rushton to play Billy. Jared Rushton was great. Like that kid did it. Both of them, Moscow and Rushton, were phenomenal. Um, and I guess from what I read, Tom Hanks kind of hung out with them and really studied David Moscow's performance as young Josh to incorporate all of that into his performance when he started filming his scenes. And it shows through. Again, like I said, he feels like a kid.
Oh, yeah. That's so cool though that he like, I love those stories of when people are doing these movies where they study the person they're supposed to be, and, like,
Mhm.
this is a weird jump, a total aside, but, even, like, when you do a stage play with, like, a time travel one, like, I saw an element of that recently where you suddenly have a different character having to play the kid of that character, or, like, this is gonna show exactly my background here, in Animorphs, where you have, the guy that played Ax the alien, Paolo Costanzo, playing the guy that played Jake, and, like, you can tell they studied each other and they spent that time doing each other's mannerisms, and when they can nail that, it adds something to the performance that just, like, takes it over the top. Like, it becomes so cool because 'cause you're like, I don't know that I've ever studied someone that closely before.
Yeah. No, I definitely have not, but, and that's actors. I think that's what makes somebody like Tom Hanks the level of actor that he is, because he thinks
Right.
of that. He's like, "Wait, I'm supposed to play this guy, this kid, as an adult, but he's a child in an adult's body, so it makes sense to study the kid, study his mannerisms, and then incorporate those." There's a lot of that really good cinema language and shorthand going on in a lot of these scenes. Like, one thing I noticed, and I absolutely adored, is the costuming for Tom Hanks and for Elizabeth Perkins as Susan, and how it changes throughout the movie. Because Josh is a kid, so he's dressing like a kid to start. I mean, the first thing he does, I love that first scene where he wakes up, because it's like kind of screwball comedy, like, you know, disappearing into the bathroom and having to, fake a kid voice and all this kind of stuff. And like mom going downstairs just as he's coming out of the bathroom. But then him trying to put his clothes on is perfect, because, yeah, that makes complete sense that the first thing he would try is, I'll just get dressed. But no, he's not getting those jeans on. He barely could get one leg into him.
And even when he took off on the bike too, like the way that like the sweatpants fit him,
Mhm.
but so poorly in a way that really like it's like, oh yeah, he just found those.
Yeah. And it was great because he's like, I'll go grab dad's clothes. That's perfect. And he gets, the sweatshirt and the sweatpants, takes off. But then, like, the clothes he gets once he gets into New York City, the first set of clothes definitely don't fit him, because it's Billy's dad's stuff, which I loved. I loved the jacket and the hat he was wearing to get into New York. Killed me. But all his clothes are like what a kid would wear. And as he goes along throughout the movie, he gets more and more adult looking as he sort of figures out, oh, this is how I'm supposed to look. Um, but meanwhile, Susan is like the buttoned up, like tight fitting business suits and all this kind of stuff. And her clothes get younger and younger as she goes, as she starts embracing more of that childhood and childlike innocence that Josh has. And I just liked that, because it's never, outside of mentioning his tux when he shows up at the Christmas party or the party or whatever it is, which that thing was choice. That was white. What was it? Gold on
Yep.
white with tails. Like, oh, just wonderful. But outside of mentioning that, they never like name drop or say anything about the clothing for either of them. And I just like that, because it doesn't need an exposition, but it tells you a lot about both of them throughout the movie. So,
Absolutely. And Susan too, watching her progression, because like even the holiday party outfit, which was really like where I feel like Susan stepped in as like, oh, by the way, I'm like the co lead on this. Because I mean, whether she is or isn't, that's kind of what it felt like after a certain point.
mhm,
But when she comes in that like very fitted, like very kind of high fashion fake ballerina black dress,
yeah.
and then watching her go down from there. But the other thing I loved is how often her expressions and mannerisms softened with her clothing. Like
Mhm.
another fantastic acting choice. And like when especially at like the dinner where like then Tom Hanks goes to help the kid with the homework he was probably doing like last week himself.
Yep.
And like seeing the way she interacts there was like it was just fantastic like way that they were kind of going past each other and
Mhm.
maybe contributing to their where they're going in life at different places. I don't know. It was a lot of beautiful choices and direction there.
It really, really was. And even something as simple as and noticeable as Susan smoking like a freight train through the first half of the
Yes.
movie. And as she gets closer and closer to Josh, she stops smoking completely. And I mean, first of all, it's a movie from the 80s, so everybody's smoking. Like, and that's normal, even to the point where when he starts his job the first day, they're like, "Do you smoke?" "Well, I did once," which is a great response. I love just everything he says. But the guy's like, "Yeah, only in the break room," right? Like, you're smoking
Still
indoors.
inside, right?
Yeah.
You're still allowed to do it
Mhm.
inside.
So just little things like that really add to the movie. And like everything that Josh does perfectly makes sense. When he is the kid at the beginning, I relate to that a lot, because that was I didn't live in the suburbs like that necessarily, but where I grew up was that type of place. But I was that kid collecting baseball cards, right? You open the pack of cards and you're like, yep, I got that one, got that. Ooh, I need that one. Like I loved that. And absolutely was the kid who couldn't talk to anyone else. Like I couldn't talk to the girls that I liked at all. I was covered in flop sweat and my tongue grew like filled my mouth. That was me. So I got that. But then when he gets big and he goes into the city, he's just the same guy and it's perfect. I loved and Tom Hanks again has that infectious energy. Now, a couple other names because I mentioned De Niro, but a couple other names that were up for the role of Josh. You ready for these? Penny Marshall wanted John Travolta.
Okay. I'm trying to
Um,
imagine that as a choice.
it is a choice. So he almost got it, except that he was considered at the time box office poison because he hadn't had his renaissance yet. This would have been 5, 6, 7 years before Pulp Fiction. So this was in the Look Who's Talking era for John Travolta, and he just wasn't looked at the same way. I think he would have been interesting, but I don't know that he would have the same, at that time, innocence that Tom Hanks brings to it. And it's weird because when he did Phenomenon, I feel like he had a little bit of that, but I think that was a different type of kind of innocence that character had in that movie as compared to what you need playing a child here. But the other one that caught my eye, again, this one I take with a grain of salt because I only saw it in one bit of trivia, was Robin Williams.
That could have been it would have been a completely different movie, but it still, I think, would have been good.
Yeah, and we sort of get a little bit of what that could have been if you think of Jack that he made a few years later, where he's playing a 10-year-old in a 40-year-old's body. It would have been such a high energy movie with him in
Oh, yeah.
'88 because this is right at kind of Good Morning Vietnam era. So he's got all the energy.
Yeah, I'm just picturing the trampoline scene again. I don't know why that one keeps standing out to me, but I'm just picturing that again, but like adding in like a Robin Williams thing. And I'm just imagining him like, come on, get up here. Like it would have been that very, I'm almost imagining like his stand-up comedy, like beats, but
Mhm.
without the swearing and the accent work probably.
Probably. There also would have been he would have been a lot sweatier if Robin Williams was playing the
Yes.
character. Like they would have
Yeah.
needed it would have needed an on-set towel boy.
They wouldn't have gone with the white tux at all. That
No.
would have been see-through in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Oof, that would have been rough. And it's Robin Williams. He was hairy enough. He could have just shown up without a shirt and nobody would have known. So,
Oh, that bathroom scene would have changed immensely, right? When he looks in the mirror and kinda touches his chest hair, that would have
okay.
ooh,
That I would like to see though. That would have been great
it would have been very funny.
because he could have like gotten his hands lost in his chest hair.
They would have just been gone.
Um, so I mentioned Elizabeth Perkins as Susan. I liked her in this.
Yeah.
I thought she played the role really well because it's a strange role to have to play. Because when if you think about it, she has to be. First of all, they have the one scene with her. John Hurd plays her boyfriend at the beginning, Paul. Um, John Hurd is like the go-to '80s dickhead. Like he was so good at playing that role. Um, he has that smarmy look about him. He's everything I see him in where like just interviews, he's just genuinely seems like a really great guy, but he was so good at playing this type of role. But he has that one scene with her where he kind of calls her out as like sleeping her way to the top. And I feel like maybe
Yeah.
that's something you wouldn't have in the script today. Might change how her character is now. Because
Do
there
you think
are things that didn't age well from this movie. We'll say that.
there were do you think they even would have attempted to make a movie like, I feel like if you add the sort of cultural over that we have today to the lens of that movie, would they even attempt to make something like that?
I don't think you would do that. I think you would have her character in the movie, but she would be just a different person. She wouldn't be. She would be like driven uh, as like career woman, but not. You wouldn't go the route of like, oh, she's sleeping her way through, to get to where she wants to be. It would be more. I think today would be more along the lines of like just overly driven and doesn't pay attention to relationships
That
in a
makes like,
real
it
way.
would be a teaching her it's still teaching her how to be a kid, but in the way of, like, you need to recapture that essence to be good at your job, maybe, like, something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that would make a lot more sense, and I think would also age better.
Probably.
Um,
Probably a little bit
so,
better.
but I do like her arc in this as she kind of realizes that the stuff that she took as important isn't, and she sees Josh. I did capture it. I'm going to play it in a little bit, but the line where she mentions he's a grown up is perfect because he is simultaneously completely immature, but also like leaps and bounds ahead because he just sees the world as a 13-year-old, which is a very simple way to see the world. Um, it helps when you're a 13-year-old that's a vice president and can afford a wonderful apartment in Manhattan. I want that apartment, like that thing. Whew, boy.
That billions of dollars today, like,
Oh yeah,
that's oh.
insane. I can't imagine. I did love somebody did the adjustment for inflation on his first paycheck that he got,
Yeah?
which is roughly about $500 in today's money for 1 week.
Okay. So
So
that's
still,
not terrible.
no, still pretty underpaid
I
for New
mean, for
York
New York,
City,
it
but
is. Yeah.
I get why he freaks out about getting $187 back then. I
Oh
mean,
my god, if
especially as a kid.
I at 13 would, yeah.
Yeah.
If somebody handed me that much as a 13-year-old, I'd be all over that. I'd be like, "Hell yeah, I'm rich forever."
Yeah. And he does exactly what the kid would do, which is blow all of it in one day on food and candy.
I
I'm
wanna
never
know how
gonna
much
eat
he spent
again.
on the suit. Oh, yeah, that was very good.
Well, by then he was the vice president and he was getting he mentioned that he rented the tux. And I think a lot of the stuff in that apartment was rentals, which is something that for me where I grew up that just wasn't a thing. You didn't rent like we didn't have when I was growing up rental furniture and stuff like that. It did come along eventually. But yeah, that was a thing where it was hard for me to relate to that. But I just assumed that's what it was like in a city. So, um, did you have you've mentioned the trampoline scene a couple times, but was that your favorite scene or did you have a favorite kind of scene or moment?
Ooh. I don't think that was my favorite. It just left an impression, I think, simply because it felt like a catalyst moment to me.
Hmm.
Um, and I love too the way that they did the shots of that of the inside to outside of the apartment, so you almost
Yeah.
became like a voyeur of
Hmm.
this scene and, like, you could interpret it interior, childlike, or exterior, something else, but I think probably my favorite scene oh, man. I love the ending one where he's making the wish on is it the Zoltan machines, and there's just this moment of, like, you have the chase of, is Susan going to get there in time to
Hmm.
stop him, I guess? And then by the time she gets there, it's too late, but he was already so resolute in his decision that I was led in that moment following Susan to believe that this was going to be a big, like, you're gonna get there right at the right moment, you're gonna have the conversation, you're gonna come to terms with each other, and it wasn't. I loved the fake out of, like, when he
Right.
was just like, "No, Susan, you don't understand. Like, I can't. I have to go back." And then when he invited her, like, "Well, come back with me," and she's like, "Well, that's something that I can't do with my life." I loved the sort of whole dichotomy of that scene. So I think that might have been my favorite, but with just an honorable mention to that dance scene where they were, like, having this childlike time at the fair, and she's like, "Well, let's just go dancing," and he was like, "Okay," because I don't know, like, the casualness of all of that delighted me when I saw it.
It's very good. In that last scene, when he gets to the boardwalk and we just see him looking past camera, and has that kind of almost defeated look on his face. Did you think we were going to go reverse shot and she's going to be standing there?
That would
Because they
make
kind
sense.
of
I don't know that it occurred, but, that would make sense.
because it kind of feels like that's what they're setting up, right? It's like she beat him to the spot
Right.
somehow. Um,
Right, and was waiting for him.
but I love that, it's no, he sees it. Now the funny thing is, he walked right past that Zoltar machine and they
Yes,
went dancing.
earlier.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Which was one of those things where, again, logic brain kicked in, and I'm like, wait, he was looking so hard for this thing, and now whatever it is, 6 weeks later, he doesn't care anymore, and he's just walking right past it.
But
Meanwhile,
that
this
had to
carnival
be,
was
like
there the whole time.
right, but that had to be, like, the importance to him, right? Like, because
Mhm.
at the time when he walked past it, the most important thing was Susan and that relationship and his job,
Yeah,
and then when the job became too important was when he hit that point of, like when he told his friend basically, "Shut up, I'm on the phone." His friend hung up, and he was like, "I've gone too far. I
yeah,
have to backtrack."
which was great because we didn't forget for the most part about Billy. Like, one thing this movie does do is we do have characters kind of fade out or disappear for long stretches of time. Like Paul is around, and then once Paul and him have their little fight on the racquetball court, we just kind of forget about Paul until the meeting a little bit later. Although that fight on the racquetball court, there again, that's Tom
So
Hanks.
good.
Just it's exactly what a kid would do. So perfect. Um, but we kind of forget about Paul. It's same with Mr. McMillan, right? Robert Loggia. Loggia. I can't remember if it's a hard or soft G. Either way.
I just don't know, you're the expert.
But he's important to a point, and then we just sort of forget about him. Like he's just not there. Billy, for the most part, does kind of come in and out. He doesn't really ever go away. But when he does show back up, because he got the stuff finally, 6 weeks have gone by, and the city of New York sent him the paperwork, and he's all for it, and he gets in there. That is the emotional climax of the movie. It's not him and Susan, it's him and Billy, because that is, while I feel like his relationship with Susan is important for his growth, who Josh is tied to his friend Billy and his former, his life in that sense. And so that's that emotional moment that everything hinges on. Because like you said, that's when he sort of realizes, oh, things have gone too far. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. That was the pivot moment of, like, that was the for, uh for that character, that was the moment where the decision was made. So, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And then it was just the fallout afterwards with
Mhm.
Susan.
Yeah. And again, Jared Rushton is Billy, perfect. He was so good, and he got our one F bomb in the movie. I might have captured this one. By the way,
Oh,
this movie's rated PG, not PG-13, PG.
you get an F-bomb in a PG movie?
So there's only been that I can think of 4 PG rated films that had an F bomb in them. All right, one I know is Beetlejuice because it always blows my mind that was rated PG and not PG-13.
Yeah, that's surprising in general.
It's proof that the MPA or the MPAA at the time, all the ratings are completely arbitrary because there is no way in hell PG makes sense for Beetlejuice even at that time. But that one
Even
had it,
now.
yeah, which is why the sequel was PG-13. Um, but Beetlejuice had an F bomb in it, and that was rated PG. Caddyshack 2 was rated PG and had an F bomb in it. I don't remember much about that because I try not to remember Caddyshack 2. Um, as much as I love Caddyshack 2 is rough. Spaceballs was rated PG, and that has an F bomb in it, which is one of the
That's
better
another
ones.
shocking revelation, quite honestly.
It's pretty amazing that movie is rated PG, I have to say. And that's when I forget. And then this has one. But it was a different time. You could get away with a lot more, it feels like. Things were both overly strict and you could get away with a lot. Like if this was a horror film and it was getting rated, they're so much stricter with that. Um, I've read about, certain horror films where they had to like cut frames off of a kill because You couldn't have Jason slamming like a sleeping bag with somebody in it against a tree twice. You can only do it once, or like dumb stuff like that. And what's even dumber when they do those ratings is they don't tell you what needs to be cut. They just say these are the reasons you got the rating is, language or violence. But they don't tell you exactly what it is, because Kevin Smith talked about that extensively when he was making Dogma. Dogma came back with initially an NC-17 rating, and it was for violence. And he couldn't figure it out because all the violence in that movie was off screen. Like, it would always be a scene, and then whatever was violent would happen off camera. But they kept telling him it was violent stuff, and like he's like, what else can I cut? I can't cut anything else. So it bugs me. But it's amazing that you could get away with, because there's not only an F-bomb in this, we get a lot of other language and sex jokes that
Yes.
totally flew over my head as a kid, like completely. But I definitely caught him this time.
Oh yeah, man. All right, I have a question for you. I'll say one thing, then I have a question for you specifically.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much of when they're making these arbitrary ratings, the context that it is in is important because of I'm imagine like because the F bomb in this one is immediately followed up by Tom Hanks turning into the dad character and going,
Mhm.
"Hey, language," kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if it's that context of saying, "Yeah, we said an F bomb, but it's bad," and like if that allowed them to get away
Mhm.
with it. But, for you watching it when it came out versus now, how did your feelings change from then to now on the movie? Like, I'm sure they must have.
They did, in the sense that as a kid, I liked it because it was this really cool wish fulfillment of like, oh, this is what I would want to do. Like, how great would it be to have a job where you could just play with toys all day and they pay you for it, and you can have this wonderful apartment and just hang out all day and do nothing. And it was this really cool thing there. Watching it as an adult, number one, the first thing I think of is like, this kid's missing for 6 weeks. His parents have got to be just losing their minds. And while it's not a large role, Mercedes Rule as his mom was pitch perfect. I mean, this would have been, I think, only a year or two before she got nominated for Fisher King, I think is what it was. And but she was great as the mom. But as an adult, I'm thinking the parents are just losing their minds. But also, I latched on more to him figuring out towards the end of it that like, yeah, being a kid's not so bad. And that's the thing that I look at a little bit more, because there's a lot that hits different here. Like, um, just New York in the '80s in general was a different place than it is now, and even something as simple as he goes to that crappy hotel the first night, and I love the fact that the guy working the desk walked into the room. Like, that killed me. Um,
There was so much about that scene that's where I really wondered about the PG rating because just the sound the first night of the people arguing in the alley and
mhm,
then the gunshots and the screaming and like
yeah.
that's when like I was talking to my partner about that and he goes, "Well, how have you never seen this movie? It was on the TV all the time. Like everybody watched it. It was constant." And then that scene popped up and I was like, "How was this on the TV all the time?" Like that's that's kind of scary for a kid.
hmm Oh yeah, for sure. I think the other thing is, as an adult watching it, especially today, you pay a lot more attention to the romance angle of things
Yes.
and
Yep.
how different that feels. Like, if you're 13 and watching this, it's like, ooh, it's the cool older woman, you know. Um, but then when you're watching as an adult, you're like, oh, and to the credit of this movie, as soon as Susan starts to figure out what's going on, like, we never get anything overt. We're led to assume that something happened the one night, but nothing. We don't see anything smart on their part. But when Susan figures out at the end, there's that moment where Josh goes in for the kiss, and then she kisses him on the forehead because she now knows, like, this is a child. So I give the movie credit there, but at the same time, it's like it gets a little towing the line of ickiness. Um, that again, you're not sure how they. I'm not sure exactly how you would handle that in today's climate of making a movie, because you could still make this type of movie today, but that subplot would be very different.
They'd commit so much harder to the bunk beds, like just so much harder
Oh
to
yeah,
that.
it's a great scene though. The bunk bed scene is pretty incredible. Like the whole thing where he takes her back to his apartment because they're having two completely different conversations in that apartment. Also, as a kid and even as an adult, I love the fact that he has a soda machine in his apartment. That was
I
something I
was
always wanted.
oh my god, it's so cool. And I also love the fact that the two of them, the very first thing they did, like priority number probably 2 or 3, was rig it so that they could just hit a button and the soda
Yep.
came out.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's what you'd be doing. Same with this pinball machines, right? Rig those so you don't need your quarters. Um, yeah, it's just one of those where it does hit different as an adult, but I think that overall it aged well, and I think part of that is Penny Marshall as the director. Which, by the way, this was the first, according to the trivia, this was the first film with a woman director to gross over $100 million.
That's amazing. That is really cool.
So yeah, that is pretty great. That's a kind of a landmark thing, and that tells you how big this was at the time, pun intended, of a film to gross over $100 million in 1988. Like that's a huge number then. And it was Penny Marshall, who did go on to have to do some other. I mean, A League of Their Own is a great movie. If you haven't seen that, that's a wonderful one.
I haven't.
And it's I mean, she's come a long way from Laverne and Shirley, is all I'm saying. Or she did. She sadly passed away a few years ago. But I always thought she was great as a director. I forgot she directed Awakenings like 2 years later. Okay, that's another one. But yeah, I think that helps, right? I think that's what helps make this movie kind of age better, even for anything that's towing the line of problematic, is her way of handling that in this was really
I
well.
mean, well and truly, because that to I mean, for us to be able to sit here like how many, 30 some odd years later and still be like, hey, some of this wouldn't fly, but there's still that hesitation of like, but they did it well enough that it kinda still works, right? And like there are movies that 10 years after they came out in like the 90s, you're like, oh wow, okay, we can't watch that anymore.
Yeah,
So that's pretty impressive.
you think of something like American Pie, for instance, which is 10 years younger than this. I think it was late 90s, 99, something like that. Hasn't aged as well. Like the jokes in that it's rough. It's real rough. By the way, the hotel clerk at that hotel he goes to, that Fleabag motel, that actor's name, Rockets Red Glare, is what he is credited as.
Incredible.
That's phenomenal. That is a wonderful name. That whole scene was great. Like when he gets into the room and it's $17 for the room, $10 deposit for the sheets. That was a joke I didn't get as a kid at all. Made me laugh.
Oh, that would have gone over my head completely.
Sailed harmlessly past me. And then I watched it this time. I was like, oh. I also, another thing you would definitely change remaking this or doing it today is most of John Lovitz's character. Because he is that, womanizing kind of dude. And I mean, Lovitz is perfect at it. And he was perfect at the time for this, but you would definitely do that completely different. Plus, I feel like you don't need him because you have Billy. It's just they had to have some sort of a stand-in in the office proxied for him. So, because you can't have Billy at the toy company when he's working in computers. But because he only spends like a couple of days in the computer department, Lovitz's character just sort of, again, disappears and then shows up at the party to dance amazingly before kind of just being forgotten again. I'll tell you one of my favorite moments, and it's just a silly little thing, but I love his birthday with him and Billy at that
Yeah.
Italian Benihana. Is basically what it was like.
I've had, you know what, until you just brought it up again, I had totally forgotten it, but the whole like tossing, was it dough balls?
Yeah, it was crazy. But I kind of loved that. Like I've never seen anything like that before or since at all.
No, I wouldn't even know what kind of restaurant to try and how would you even find that?
Yeah, I don't know. Only in New York. Only in New York.
Yeah.
So I captured some audio from this because there's some great clips and moments in here. Some of them are just fantastic deliveries. I do have one of the things I always capture are laughs. So I have a couple of Susans because they really got me. But first is Josh has gone. They've gone through all the bureaucracy and the red tape as they're trying to like find the Zoltar machine, and so he's just dejected, sitting outside like City Hall. And I just loved.
I'm gonna be 30 years old for the rest of my life.
That is such a 13-year-old mentality right there. I'm going to be 30 years old for the rest of my life.
I think the follow-up line to that is or old like older 30s or something like that
Yeah.
from Billy. I actually immediately then went and looked up how old Tom Hanks was while recording this and was like, okay, so that's like just a joke on him because first of all, I didn't believe he was like 32, I think, when they were doing it.
Yeah.
I didn't believe that. I was like, no, he's in his 20s. Like, there's no freaking way. He looks so young.
He does.
But yeah, that cracked me up. I can't imagine delivering that line when you're 32 and you're saying that.
And he had a very, again, he's got a very like young face, especially at this point in his career. Also, I got to give him credit. He was in great shape because that whole scene of him in the bathroom when he first wakes up, I was like, all right, Tom. So when he gets his first paycheck and he goes to the bank, again, this scene just tickled me because it's exactly how a kid would act at the bank. Like when he walks up to the teller and he shows her the check and then slides it over, and then he shows her his bank card and then slides it in there, was killing me already. But when she asks him how he wants the check cashed, and I clipped this, but I shortened it down because there's the long bit where like him and Billy discuss what they want, but I just loved this.
So how would you like that?
3 dimes, a $100 bill, and 87 ones.
It's so perfect because you know what they're doing. They're going to the arcade with all those ones.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It was between that and they're also just stacking them up to see like this is what $80 worth of ones feels like.
Oh, I cannot imagine at 13 years old for me would have been 94-ish, 95. And $80 at that point would have been insane to have in my hands at one time. So
yeah, for me that would have been it would have been Pokemon cards in 10 minutes flat for me.
Oh, absolutely. No, I would have had so much ice cream and so many baseball cards and probably a Nintendo game. So, yeah, but that's perfect. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, PG film, got a few swears in it. It's fine. But what I loved about this was the transition of lines here has layers to it. And this is his first day. He's in the office. You're hearing John Lovitz on the phone with someone else, and Josh is just overhearing this. But we transition to McMillan and our introduction to him.
I don't have time to Xerox. Let the new guy do it.
That's total bullshit.
That line out of context works great because I just love like the layers of that. That's clever writing and clever direction and editing to pair those two up. And also it's a great delivery of that's total bullshit. I love that. And what a wonderful introduction to his character, who I feel like we don't get enough of McMillan, because McMillan running this toy company, he is Josh in a lot of ways, right? He is the adult. He is what Josh would become if he stayed an adult, I feel like.
There's that, but there's also the kind of fantasy feeling of like, but this is like the mentor that sees through the kind of like somehow he can peer into his soul and know he's a kid and he
Yeah.
wants to give him this chance. So like there is a whole bunch of like it felt like almost extra sort of fantasy surrounding Macmillan as a character for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I can see that. Plus, he owns the business, but he's not thinking about it like a business. He's thinking, I mean, that introduction right after his first line there, he talks about, I don't care what the market projections are. The kids didn't like the toy, it doesn't sell. And that's all he cares about is the toy fun, which is why it's great when he spends his Saturdays going to FAO Schwartz to see what the kids are looking at and what they want. Like, it completely flies in the face of anything businessman related, but it's such a smart way to look at it. And such an old school
Genuinely.
way to look at it too.
And I just loved when he tuned in immediately when he started talking about like, well, of course the hockey men suck. These new ones suck because you can't go up and down the ice. You can only
Mhm.
turn and like those like little moments. It all of that got me. And I
Yes.
just loved the sort of layers and details and nuance there. And the meeting, I could talk about that meeting all day where they bring out the building robot.
Oh, that's so good because he's just sitting there playing with it the whole time, and that I don't get it, and it's like that's exactly like why is that fun to play with a building that turns into a robot? But that feels like a focus group bunch of people would come up with, um, and not talk to kids at all. By the way, the standing piano scene,
Yes.
uh, according to Robert Loggia, we're going to go with both Loggia. Um, the day they were filming that, uh, him and Tom Hanks noticed that they had doubles dressed like them for the scene. And according to him, they didn't want to have, in case they couldn't do the dance moves right. And it became their goal to do the whole thing without the aid of the doubles, which
I'm so glad.
I feel like they pulled that off because we only have a couple of shots from that whole thing that are in on just their feet. Almost all of it is wide shots showing both of them. And honestly, that's so much better because it looks fantastic and you can see them going through it. And they're not perfect either. They're missing a key occasionally. So it really looked good. And I just loved that whole thing and the bonding and the connection between the two of them right there. If I had
That's
one
so good.
Yeah, if I had one complaint, it's that there's not enough between Josh and Macmillan in this movie. Like they kind of set you up to have them have a better relationship. Um,
Right.
maybe that's what you do if you make this movie today is you kind of Susan is a character, but she's not a main part. It's more of the kid becoming older dealing with somebody like Macmillan. It's more of a Willy Wonka thing at that point.
That's exactly what I was thinking too is, okay, it's kind of becoming Willy Wonka, but in a way, I like it because it's not man, it would almost just be like Charlie going up and being like, "Okay, I'm gonna work here now."
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
oh, that's so cool. I love that.
So yeah, that was great. This was a great exchange between Billy and Josh the first night in the hotel room. They get in there and of course it just looks rough and Billy is still there with him and I just love this.
What if I can't sleep?
It's probably better if you don't.
Billy is a wise kid. He really is.
Yeah. He
It's
knows more than he lets on for sure.
Yeah,
If
he
he had
does.
to become big in this movie, it would have been like just Billy takes over New York.
Yeah, basically. It's just probably be better if you don't. I also love again everything with Josh and Billy when Tom Hanks is playing Josh is just fantastic. The clip I played at the beginning where they're doing their little song, um, but this one too, they're sitting on the bench. The sitting on the bus bench scene, I loved that, and just this.
Where did you get this?
From my Dad's top drawer.
You stole it?
It's an emergency fund.
Jesus, Billy!
Well, what do you call this?
I mean, he's not wrong. It's an emergency. They need the money. So,
Another thing that if the cops were on it, questioning the neighbors, questioning his friends, they might have been like, well, money went missing. Maybe
Mhm.
there's a connection between the two.
yeah, if the cops were doing their job, clearly they weren't. They showed up. They're like, I don't know, kid's missing. All right, we'll look for him. And they left and then just forgot about him. I'm not sure.
We'll put him on the milk carton. That works 90% of the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
No, but that was definitely a thing of this era, was the milk cartons. That was like early 80s to like 95, 96, I think, was when Amber Alerts became a real thing. But what's funny about that is it was a relatively short period of time that you put the picture of the missing kid on the milk carton, yet it became a trope, and you can tell just about anybody that's, I would say, older than 25 can remember that being a thing. Right.
I'm sure, and I feel like it's constant enough that you could even tell somebody that's younger, and like half of them might be like, "Yeah, I've heard of it." But same thing,
Mhm.
like the save on your computer being a floppy disk, where they're like, "I know that, but I
Yeah.
don't get it."
hmm Yeah, they've seen it, but they don't understand the context of it. This one I labeled grown up. I don't remember what it is. I do this all the time. I label things and it was hours ago.
It's a
It was
surprise audio.
Yeah, so we'll find out together.
What is so special about Baskin?
He's a grown-up.
That's what it was. That's a great
Ugh.
line. It's
It
really
got
good.
me. It's such a good line. It got me so hard in the moment because it was one of those where like my initial reaction was like, "No, he's not." And then like you think about it a little more and you're like, "Okay, so this is more of a conversation about like kind of expectations and relationships and what you're looking for."
Yep. I think this one is when he walks into the house while his mom is cleaning, which her reaction to a strange man walking into the house, pretty relatable.
Yeah, pretty good.
But I just liked this. I think that's what this is.
It's Josh.
Yeah, he's so like earnestly like, Mom, it's me. And she is, I mean, that's how I would react if my kid came up to me in the body of a 30-year-old. I'm going to grab a knife too and be like, you better get out of here.
But you know what? I loved the shift of that scene of when she's surprised. It's just that get out, get away, leave. And then when he keeps following her and keeps getting in her space and keeps doing it, and then takes his pants off to show the birthmark,
Yeah.
that's when she's like, there's like almost a shift. Like she goes from thinking this guy's a threat that's trying to hurt me to this guy is like out of his mind and I now can get the upper hand. And like you can feel that shift and she grabs the knife and like, gets out. And
Yep.
I appreciated the flow of that scene, the way it moved, and then that power dynamic.
Yes.
It was really good.
And a stigma in the chat brings up a great point, which is when he first goes in the house and she freaks out, he runs back out and wipes his feet on the mat and then comes back in.
Yes.
That was choice. Like that was absolutely perfect. So, loved that.
Yeah, if she didn't realize it was her kid then it wasn't happening after that.
No, not at all. So his job interview is fantastic because first he's filling out the application. And I love him like trying to read what the other guy is writing on his application because he has no idea whatsoever. I've been there. I know what that's like. But when he sits down and he's talking to the hiring manager, and the first thing is,
There's a couple of numbers missing on your Social Security.
Oh, 12.
how that wasn't a red flag, I'm not sure at all. But hey, sure. I did like Billy giving him his locker combination for his Social Security number because
That was brilliant.
look back, I didn't know at 13 my Social Security number. I just didn't. So I wouldn't even know how many digits it was at that point, and they didn't either. That's really relatable. So I like that. But then I like where he had written the school that he went to, and it just happened to be George Washington Junior High. So he just wrote George Washington. He probably actually wrote like George Washington Junior High School, but he had to write it so small to fit it that the guy couldn't read it. But I love, it's George Washington. And the guy's like, oh yeah, no, my brother-in-law got his doctorate from there. But this exchange, again, this is very telling of the era.
Did you pledge?
Yes. Every morning.
I loved that because I immediately was like, that's right. That was a thing back then that I'm guaranteed they don't do anymore. At least not in the schools that that I have been around recently, but that every morning doing the Pledge of Allegiance in school. I remember that distinctly.
Oh my God. So I am Canadian, so I moved to the US when I was still in school, and the first day of having to say the Pledge of Allegiance, I was like, "Hey, what is this? And how do
Right.
you know all the words? Like, what are we doing?"
Yeah. So that one really, really got me. Um,
That's very funny.
Howard Shore did the music for this movie. Now
I
Howard.
lost my mind when I saw that.
Okay, good. So another Howard Shore fan. Thank you. Because he wrote quite possibly my favorite film score of all time, which is everything for the Lord of the Rings. That music is forever in my heart. Like I just listen to it all the time.
Same.
And I liked his music for this. I especially liked that just kind of like jaunty piano stuff is there. And I captured a little bit of it in that scene transitioning from the bus bench into, going over the bridge into New York was just. It's got a very Randy Newman feel to it. Like you could take that and put some lyrics over it, and it could have been the end credits music for Toy Story.
Oh my God, absolutely it could have been.
It may have even influenced it. We don't know. But I really liked that. Susan had a couple great lines, and I captured some of hers. First of all, I get laughs. I love kind of stage laughs and acting laughter. Sometimes it's silly and over the top, and sometimes they're honest. But I just liked this from her. This was after. Oh, this okay. First, we get this line with her and Macmillan.
Susan,
Love your tux.
I think it's the same as the maitre d's.
That was great because that again tells you a lot about Macmillan. Right there, he's willing to make that joke. But then her laugh right after that. Oh, that's such a painfully forced laugh of somebody who's trying to look good to their boss.
I am sucking up so hard right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And this was another one I think she had later on with. I want to say this is with Josh. This one I think is shorter. Yeah, that's like a very. I'm not really laughing kind of laugh, but I like both.
Yeah,
of
this
those.
is uncomfortable, and I'm trying to just kind of get through the situation, sort of.
When they're dancing, and she asks him the question, I loved that exchange because first, okay, before we get there, when they're riding the elevator up to his apartment, and she's trying to like probe him for information, she's trying to get stuff out of him, and she mentions living alone, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's for like 6 weeks or something like that," and I just liked.
That's what they invented Xanax for, right?
Like, yeah, I mean, maybe sort of, but that's her mentality at the time. And to see her arc go from that to when they have their date at the carnival and they go dancing, and then she asks him,
What were you like when you were younger?
Oh, well, I wasn't much different.
I believe that about you.
like, he is exactly what she wants in a person, without realizing it. In terms of like outlook, obviously she doesn't want to be dating a 13-year-old.
Right.
But it's that innocent outlook at the world because she has been so wrapped up in this corporate kind of rat race for so long that it's refreshing to run into somebody who isn't that. So I dug
And
that.
I loved that. And it was so brilliant too in the meeting when he's talking to the smarmy guy as well, where he just goes, "I don't get it." And the guy reads that as like, "You're trying to corporately sabotage me." And
Mhm.
he has the whole fit afterwards. And I love it because when he tries to do it back, it doesn't work. And it really felt like it was the movie saying it's because it's genuine. If it comes from a place of being genuine, it means something and
Yes.
it'll work. And if, it doesn't, then you come off like that guy and it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And then she also has, when she's trying to convince him to, look, we're going to do this pitch, we have to do this. And she says,
Come on, it'll be neat.
like, he's rubbed off so much on her by that point that she's now using the terminology he would use because it just makes sense. And I love that.
Yeah, and it stuck out like a sore thumb too, but like in a
Oh,
good
yeah.
way, right?
Mhm.
Like that was
Well,
such a
and
brilliant line.
because Josh latches onto it immediately, and that it totally flips his demeanor around, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it would be neat," and he's all for it. So then we get that wonderful scene with them again. Another scene with them having two different conversations against each other when they're working on the digital comic book. Which, boy, talk about predicting the future a little bit. But she is trying to figure out what their relationship is, and I love that asking, "What are we doing here?" And he's like, "What do you mean? What we're comic books? Like, hello, that's what we're doing." Because he's a kid. He's just oblivious to all of it. So,
God, and the way he did it, like with the book too, where he was just kind of doing that playful, like hitting her with like this,
yeah,
we're doing this, and it was like
yes,
such a young person coded thing.
absolutely. Um, two more clips. One of them is we have our F bomb. I captured it. It's too perfect not to. It's such a good one. So recently I've been thinking about because I saw Beetlejuice, which reminded me of the F bomb drop in the first one. Both those movies have great uses of their F bomb. Perfect. Um, I recently saw the third Venom film, Venom: The Last Dance. That had a great one in it in a PG-13 movie. Unexpected, great one in that. But I completely forgotten about this one. Just totally forgot it. And it's really good. And it's from Billy.
Who the fuck do you think you are?
Hey!
Hey, you're Josh Baskin, remember?
That kid acted his socks off. He was so good. And that moment is just pitch perfect because it does snap Josh. Like at that moment, it snaps him into something, which I really, really, really liked. So had to get that. Had to. And then you get this moment at the end where Josh leaves the meeting because he just doesn't know what to do. Like he does the total kid thing of I'm run, and so he flies, he runs away, which leaves her now flustered, and then she does the same thing and she leaves, and we get the whole scene we talked about where he finds the machine and they have the conversation of like she finally figures it out. She realizes that what he was telling her just a little bit before that was actually true, and he wasn't like laying a line on her or anything like that. But when he drops this with her, is emotionally just a gut punch of telling her,
Look, I've been thinking about it, and there's a million reasons for me to go home, but there's only one reason for me to stay.
that's oof, like that's tough to lay all of that out that way, even though you kind of know he realizes there's no real way he's going to stay. Like he doesn't actually want that, but that would be the only reason for him to stay, is to stay with her. And but man, and her reaction to it is genuine of no, like you can't do that. And I really, really liked that.
Yeah, I think that's why it was my favorite scene was the realization. There's nothing I love more than two characters realizing an absolute truth about each other that will destroy their relationship and just having to come to terms with that in the moment of like
Mm-hmm.
there's a million ways that we could try to force this, but in the end the right decision is to just go our separate ways.
Yeah. I am really glad that they never made a sequel to this. For as
Oh no,
popular as
yeah.
it was, and let's face it, if this were made today and it does the popularity that it is, somebody's making a sequel. That it's just guaranteed. And even back then, it probably got questioned for a sequel, but it doesn't warrant one. It doesn't need one, and I'm glad we didn't get it because I'm not sure where you would go with a sequel with this. I mean, the obvious thing is to do something where Susan becomes young, but the resolution to that is never going to work because the only way that story can end is for her to go back to being an adult. Um, and you wouldn't do Josh turning big again. You wouldn't really, I mean, you could spin it out and have it happen to Billy, but that is also kind of doesn't really make much sense. But I feel like these kinds of stories typically don't warrant continuing the story. It's a self-contained thing because you can't really learn much more. You've learned the lesson you need to learn as a character. Josh wants to be big because he feels like nothing is going right in his life. He gets that only to learn it's not really what he wants. And he just wants to go back home. I just don't feel like you can continue that story in a meaningful way that feels earned.
No. And I mean, I can think of a very unmeaningful one that might be fun, and that would be to follow the machine around as it grants wishes and watch all of the sort of like little snippets of like people realizing their mistakes and things. But I don't feel like it would work as it would almost be a separate idea than a
Yeah.
sequel to this movie.
Now, as an anthology film, I think that would be awesome. Different people giving different wishes to the Zoltar machine, only for it to all go wrong. I think that would be really cool. But yeah, it would have to be something very different from this, and you definitely wouldn't want to do another body swap type of thing because you've done that once already. So no, it's a very self-contained story. So I'm glad that we never got a sequel. No one forced that. Because they tried, like I mentioned Bruce Almighty earlier, and they tried to make a sequel with that, but it really wasn't the same thing at all. And I think it even started off as a completely different story that they just kind of shoehorned into being a sequel to Bruce Almighty to trade on the popularity of that movie. So yeah, it just didn't need that, and I'm glad we didn't do that. Now here's my question for you: would you want to, as a kid, be older, or conversely go back? Like if you had the Zoltar machine and you knew that it would work and grant you a wish like that, would you do one or the other? And if you would, which one?
That's Man, that's such a difficult question.
Right?
Because first of all, I would not go to big. That's out of the question. Not doing that one. But would I go back to like childhood, but it is, with all the limitations of it's within this time period. It's not that everybody in your life knows that that's happening to you.
Hmm.
Like I'm getting sucked into the same problem that he did where I'm like, yeah, absolutely I want to do that. But then I feel like this next step 2 of this movie is me going back to being a kid in the current day and then realizing I now have to like, hey, you can't actually earn money or do anything. And by the way, your parents aren't taking care of you because they think you're an adult. And also like I could just see it all going sideways. But
Yeah, it's
man,
it's
would it
the
be fun to
fact
be
that
a kid?
it's not time travel, right? It's
It's
not time
not,
travel
right.
in the traditional sense. It's time travel in that you're going from who you are now to a younger version of you, but everything else around you stays the same and you're cognizant of that too. That's the other part of it. Like what everything is like, and now you are a kid existing in that world. I can't imagine the shell shock of that and how tough that would be. Um yeah. I think if somebody told me, yes, this machine will grant you a wish like that, I'm like, nope, sorry, don't want nothing to do with that because that will just not go well. I think is where I would land.
I think that's the smart move, and I think that's, like, what I should do. However, left alone, like, in the streets of a carnival, making the decision off the cuff, I mean, maybe, but that's a different scenario.
Now, if I didn't know that it could happen, right, and I just did the machine and it was like, oh, you can make a wish, I would make a wish. I don't know what that would be, but it wouldn't be. Although I could have seen myself in that age, that sort of 12 to 14 age of being like, no, I want to be an adult because that's the perfect age to do it at. You're old enough to sort of understand the difference and see the good things in it, but not old enough to really grasp exactly what you would be dealing with, to an extent. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, I think that's why most of your stories that revolve around this trope are somebody that's 13 becoming 30.
Yeah,
Those are kind of the ages you
absolutely.
always see.
Yep. Makes perfect sense. Like you're right. That's exactly the right age where you're like, you can see enough of adulthood to think that that's to get the good parts of it without comprehending kind of all the other stuff that comes with it.
Mhm.
So,
And it's
yeah.
also perfect in a film because you can easily show exactly what a 13-year-old kid would do if he suddenly had a ton of disposable income, right? You'd be buying trampolines for your apartment with 15-foot ceilings, and who cares what the kitchen looks like because you can just get takeout food. And I love the bunk beds, like all of it. It's just so perfect. And it all comes down to the performance. It's Tom Hanks that carries this entire movie. Um, he did not win the Academy Award because the year that he was up for it was the year that Dustin Hoffman won for Rain Man. And you also had, I think, Gene Hackman was up that year, and Edward James Olmos. Like, it was a banger year for performances, but his was worthy. Like, if he had won, you definitely wouldn't be upset by it because he's that good in this. It's believable. It's
I
the believability
man,
of the man child.
absolutely. And I almost wanted to say like, but also like, he was so young, and again, forgetting he's like in his 30s because he looks like he's in his 20s, right? You're
Yeah.
like, no, he's got 40 more years to win awards. No big deal.
I mean, to his credit, he definitely did win plenty after that. And,
Yep.
really, I mean, this was, I think, it's kind of was the turning point in his career in a lot of ways. Because he was popular, but he was popular for a lot of only comedies. He hadn't quite, like, he and Robin Williams were both on the cusp of like comedic, but also had dramatic chops. And early on, they were always getting typecast into the comedic roles, but both of them really wanted to show off. No, look, I can be more than that. And I feel like this might have been sort of the turning point for him, much like Good Morning Vietnam kind of was for Robin Williams, right around the same time, where uh, it's very funny, but it's also got that serious moment, especially the second half of it, to where it showed what Robin Williams was able to do, and that got him things like The Fisher King and whatnot. Because this would have been right around the time of him doing like The Money Pit and Dragnet for Tom Hanks. In fact, I think Dragnet was the movie he was working on when they first approached him about doing Big.
The reason that he didn't think he could do Big.
Yeah. So then he does Big and The Burbs, but then it's Turner and Hooch. So I think that's the next one. That's that 88, 89, 90 is when he starts to show off like a lot of those dramatic chops before you get to what is it? Philadelphia, 93. So he sort of went from like screwball comedies to comedies with some drama to them, and then romantic comedies. Sleepless in Seattle was 93, the same year as Philadelphia. Crazy to think that. He did both those movies in the same year. But yeah, this was kind of what started that for me anyway. I mean, looking at it and what I remember. So it's a fantastic performance and a fantastic movie. And I'm really glad you got to watch it.
I'm glad you were the catalyst for me watching this, honestly.
Yeah. Now, is this one you think you'll revisit at any point, or do you kind of feel like, one and done, I'm good, I don't have to?
You know what? I actually, even before we got on this call today, I was thinking, I kind of want to revisit it because there were so many, like even as we were talking and bringing up so many little details, I feel like there's so many beautiful moments of just the conversational sort of exchanges, the way that it constantly feels like they're bringing up points by having two people passing each other and using that kind of transition from little to big to talk about people going through transitions in their own ways.
Mhm.
And I feel like there's like I wanted to do a second watch even before now just to kind of capture more of those little details because I love that stuff in movies, right? And I
Oh yeah.
love the musical transitions too, especially with Howard Shore. I love the musical transitions. So I just like almost want to do a watch just for music, a watch just for director stuff, or watch just for this to watch this. Like I could totally revisit it, and if I had the time, I probably would have done it a second time before we talked.
It's such a well crafted movie. And I think that's what it really
Yeah,
comes down to. Like it really shows off great writing and a script that kind of knew what it wanted, but more than that, because I feel like the script is solid, but especially Tom Hanks and I feel like Jared Rushton's performances and then the direction of Penny Marshall really takes it to another level and makes it more than it could have been. Like a different director and a different main star, and I don't know that this movie has the legs that it does. It's one of those catching
right.
lightning in a bottle.
Oh, absolutely. And it I feel in my opinion, in my flawed opinion, one of the things that really like gives it that hallmark of a well-crafted movie but not overtly so is that you don't feel like you're watching it being taught something like in a college lecture.
Mhm.
It is a good movie standalone. It's entertaining, it's fun, and then you get to the end of it and you start thinking about it and you're like, "Oh, wow. There was a lot of just beauty in this."
Yeah, it's almost because Robin Williams had movies that really hammered in the lesson that you were learning at times. Like Patch Adams does that. I love Patch Adams, but it definitely gets very heavy-handed with the "Hey, here's your lesson" type of thing. And I appreciate a movie that can teach me something like that that doesn't have to be quite so heavy-handed with it. So yeah, that's a great observation. Now, you do a podcast called the Horse Girls Podcast. I've had your
I
co-hosts
sure
on,
do. You
and
have.
uh, remind people that show where they can find it and what you all talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So Horse Girls is you can find it at horsegirls.club is our website, or look up Horse Girls Podcast will pop up, single.connection.com, THOT. That's where you can find us. But what we are doing is we are teaching Tim, our non-horse girl co-host, how to be a horse girl, one book, movie, show at a time. So we're talking about like Heartland. Listen, the movie's probably not going to be like this one, okay? It's not going to be good. They're going to be real rough, but worthy in their own sense. We do Black Beauty. That's a great movie. But yeah, we're going through all sorts of horse media and teaching Tim the ropes, as it were.
Excellent. And you brought up Animorphs earlier. You have something
Yes.
involving that as well, right?
Oh, I sure do. I have so this is where I admit to you that I have 8 billion podcasts. So I actually started doing Animorphs Anonymous, which is where my friend and I we go through all of the Animorphs books and review them and pick them apart and talk about them in depth, and we love the series. And we've now moved into all of the other books that that set of authors does, because it's Catherine and Michael and they co-author all of those books
Mhm.
with ghostwriters as well. So we do that, and I'm also on a D&D Animorphs show now too,
Oh
called
wow.
Dungeons and Drakenbeams. Yeah, so I'm deep in the Animorphs lore, and it's fantastic. I love that community so much.
Excellent. Well, if you're interested in all the Animorphs, check that out. And if you're interested in horses or just listening to Tim get taught what it's like to be a horse girl, check out the Horse Girls
Okay,
book.
I really oversold it as academic. It's nonsense. If you like goof 'em ups and terrible jokes, check out Horse Girls.
Perfect. I mean, that's what I would be there for. So,
I love it.
excellent. Now, this show I do every week now for almost 300 weeks in a row because I am a crazy person. But I do this every week in typically Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch it a live stream on either my YouTube channel or my Twitch channel. You can find all of that at tvstravis.com, which also has links to social media sites I'm on. I'm most active probably on Blue Sky at this point. But I'm TV's Travis on all of them. So you can find me there. You can email me at tvstravis@gmail.com. And I have a Patreon, including patron exclusive things like I am watching the Fall of the House of Usher right now. And I'm giving my thoughts on each episode of that. I'm 2 episodes in, and episode 2 ended in a way that I wasn't ready for. So it was quite something. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that show, and that series is going to continue as a patron exclusive, where I'm watching a series and going episode by episode, just giving reactions to it. You can do that patreon.com/WYHS. And that also helps this show kind of grow a little bit more and lets me do things like my live episodes when I go to Dragon Con, when I go to Vegas for TMS Vegas and do the show live there. The Patreon helps support that kind of stuff. And if you can't do the Patreon, that's fine. Just download the show. That's all I ask. And all that's at tvstravis.com. Now, next week is the big one. It's the milestone. It's episode number 300. And I am going to have coming back as they are shepherding me through the world of Wes Anderson. Amy Frost and Phil Keating are coming on, and they're going to make me watch the Royal Tenenbaums for the first time. They were on a while back. They had me watch The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, and I adored it. So I can't wait to see what the Royal Tenenbaums is like. All I know about this one is it's Wes Anderson. I know some of the cast, including Gene Hackman, who's a favorite of mine. So I'm really excited to watch it, and I'm excited to do a 300th episode. And if you have been with me on this journey, thank you for that. If you have memories or thoughts about the show and 300 episodes, email me. Let me know. I want to hear them. I'm even going to try and set up a speak pipe on my website so that you can leave me a voice message. So that's what's coming up. Well, Alex, thank you so much for being here this week. This was tons of fun. We'll definitely have you back sometime.
Amazing. Thank you for having me on. This was absolutely a ton of fun.
Excellent. I'm glad that you had a good time. I'm glad that we showed you a movie that you enjoyed. Maybe next time you'll bring something that's a favorite of yours, or I'll find something else you haven't seen. Who knows? But definitely.
Oh, I'm already having ideas to horse girl you up here.
Oh boy. I haven't watched a lot of horse movies, although I did see, which was the Matt Damon one? Was that Horse
He did a
Whisperer?
Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, right? He did Spirit's voice in that one.
He might have done that, but there was, I think it was, I'm thinking of the Horse Whisperer, I think, that I saw
That was with
in the theater.
Robert Redford.
I don't remember. I know I saw something with him in it in theaters because a friend of mine dragged me to that, and yeah, it was fine. But I'm easy to please. I like everything. So, at any rate, All the Pretty Horses. That's what it was. Thank you, Tim.
Ah, excellent. Okay, well, perfect. We got to make you watch Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron because I think as like a music buff kind of guy, you would appreciate the score of that.
Ooh, excellent. All right, I'll make a note of that. But yeah, until next week in episode 300, Alex, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening. And just remember that everything is kind of a bit crazy, so let's be excellent to each other. All right, this has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
I'm 3 months older than you are, asshole.
God, he was so good.
He was brilliant.